All right, let's jump right into this explainer on the 1929 UK general election. We're going to unpack a deeply dramatic three-way contest that completely reshaped British democracy. It's a fascinating story of radical changes to who could vote, massive economic anxiety, and an election night result that absolutely shocked the nation.
To really grasp the high stakes of 1929, you have to look at the climate just 1 year prior. Check out this shockingly sexist quote from 1928 spoken by Colonel Applin during a parliamentary debate. He was literally arguing that women couldn't handle politics because they couldn't work in blast furnaces or, balance a state budget while dealing with a sick child. There was a very real, deeply entrenched opposition to women taking on grave political responsibilities.
And this actually brings us perfectly to our first key term for today, the franchise, which, simply put, is the constitutional right to vote in public elections. Going into this campaign, the franchise was heavily restricted, and older laws had done very little to change women's actual position in politics. But conservative Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin pushed to expand it, realizing that anything less than equal voting rights would lose his party critical support among women.
So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll be covering expanding the franchise, the unemployment crisis, 3 competing visions, and finally, the historic election results.
Section 1. Expanding the franchise. The flapper vote controversy. So how did this massive shift actually happen? Well, after intense pressure from petitions, conservative leadership realized they needed to act. The equal voting bill ended up passing easily. We're talking 387 in favor and only 10 against. This added a staggering 2.2 million new women to the electorate. But not everyone was thrilled. The Daily Mail feared these young women, who they dismissively dubbed flappers, would just vote socialist. Headlines claiming men outnumbered everywhere triggered absolute panic in the press. Moving on to Section 2, the unemployment crisis, the core issue of the election.
1 million. Think about that for a second. For 8 agonizing years leading up to this election, over 1 million British workers, people who were ready and eager to work, were completely denied the opportunity. The sources describe this as a tragedy of human suffering and a bankruptcy of statesmanship. Unemployment was the word written on the hearts and minds of the entire British public.
Now, to solve this unprecedented crisis, voters naturally look to the party manifestos. If you're not familiar, a manifesto is basically a public declaration of a political party's policies, principles, and intentions right before an election. It was their official pitch to the nation on exactly how they would fix the economy and govern the country.
Section 3. 3 competing visions: safety, socialism, or radical action. This breakdown perfectly captures the incredible 3-way split voters were facing. You've got conservative leader Stanley Baldwin pushing traditional stability with his Safety First slogan. Then Labour's Ramsay MacDonald offering a moderate reorganization of industry. And finally, Liberal leader David Lloyd George coming in with a highly funded radical third option to conquer unemployment. Let's look a little closer at each of these. Let's start with the Conservatives, who leaned entirely into stability. In his election address, Stanley Baldwin painted himself as the man you can trust. He argued that prosperity was greater than ever before. So for the Conservatives, there were absolutely no new, radical ideas to fight unemployment, just traditional economic policies and a promise to keep industrial foundations stable.
On the other side of the ring, you have Labour. Their manifesto, titled Appeal to the Nation, aimed for what they called a socialist commonwealth. This basically meant reorganizing industry for the benefit of all citizens, moving away from pure capitalism. But, and this is key, their leader, Ramsay MacDonald, made sure to highlight his moderate constitutional credentials. He strongly disapproved of the controversial general strike. He wanted change via parliament, not the picket line.
And let me tell you, the campaign trail was absolutely fierce. Labour went on the attack, calling the Tory government supine, basically accusing them of sitting with folded arms for 4 critical years. They directly blamed the Conservatives for aiding mine owners during the crippling coal lockouts and provoking the general strike. But the Conservatives, they fired right back, vigorously defending their record. They insisted their administration had created a steady trade revival, firmly united the empire, and successfully brought down the cost of living. Meanwhile, the Liberals were plotting a massive comeback. Backed by 513 candidates and a cool £40,000 of Lloyd George's own private funds, they teamed up with great economic minds like John Maynard Keynes. Their big idea? A non-socialist strategy centered entirely on public works, which are extensive, state-sponsored infrastructure projects designed to artificially jumpstart the economy.
Their bold, headline-grabbing promise was that the state would step in and reduce unemployment to normal proportions in just one single year.
And that brings us to Section 4, the historic election results. A shocking upset.
Okay, this is where it gets wild. If we just look at raw nationwide popularity, the Conservatives actually won the highest percentage of the vote. They pulled in 38.2% of the popular vote, with Labor right on their heels at 37.1%. The Liberals managed a really solid 23.4%, capturing over 5 million votes. But you've got to see what happens when we switch over to the actual members of parliament, the seats they won. Labour captured 288 seats, becoming the majority in the House of Commons for the very first time. The Conservatives, despite literally winning the popular vote, only got 260 seats, and the Liberals, despite those 5 million individual votes, they walked away with a measly 59 seats. Crazy, right?
So how does that happen? This massive mismatch between the popular vote and the final seat count is a textbook illustration of the first-past-the-post voting system. In this system, whoever gets the most votes in a specific local constituency wins that one seat. Nothing else matters. Because those 5 million Liberal votes were spread out thinly across the entire country instead of being concentrated in specific areas, the math of the system severely penalized them.
So stepping back, why did Labour actually emerge victorious in terms of real parliamentary power? Well, they successfully replaced the Liberals as the main opposition party. On top of that, voters really trusted McDonnell's moderate approach, while Baldwin's whole safety-first pitch completely fell flat under the crushing weight of the unemployment crisis. The people simply felt a change in government was desperately needed. Ultimately, this resulted in Baldwin resigning and Labour forming a minority government. And fun fact, because modern polling didn't exist yet, historians still don't know exactly how those 2.2 million new flapper voters actually split their ballots. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Some argue this election was a victory for moderate progress, or maybe a triumph of economic conservatism over the Liberals' radical public works plan. But considering the Conservatives won the popular vote yet lost the government, and the Liberals had millions of votes essentially erased by the mechanics of the voting system, did the 1929 election truly reflect the will of the people? It's a fascinating question about democracy that honestly still resonates today. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.